Okay, so when you hear Iran and Israel, what's the first thing that pops into your head? For most of us, it's sworn enemies, right? But what if that's not the whole story? In this explainer, we're going to dive into a really fascinating analysis that looks past the headlines to uncover a hidden and, frankly, a deeply complex relationship.
And boom, right out of the gate, our source material hits us with this. The idea that Iran is opposed to Israel is a fundamentally flawed hypothesis. I mean, that just completely flips the script, doesn't it? It forces us to ask a pretty big question.
Exactly. If it's not just a straightforward story of pure hatred, then what on earth is going on? We're going to walk through a very different perspective here, one that suggests a strange, almost symbiotic relationship between the hardliners on both sides. All right, so to even begin to wrap our heads around this, we have to make one massive distinction right up front. The people of Iran are not the same thing as the political structure of the Islamic Republic. And our source argues that understanding this difference is the key to unlocking this whole puzzle.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting. Take a look at this timeline. You see how recent all this hostility actually is? Before 1979, Iran and Israel were actually close partners. They worked together on everything: the economy, military, intelligence, you name it. The intense animosity we see today, it all started with the Islamic Revolution. This isn't some ancient thousand-year feud, it's a political one.
And that's the thing. Beneath all that high-level politics, the human connection is still there. Our source points out these deep historical and cultural ties. It even talks about Iranian Jews who moved to Israel way before the revolution and now can never go back home. It's a powerful reminder that the political narrative often just erases a much richer, much more human story. So if this hostility is political, why is it so intense? Why does it just keep going? Well, that brings us to the absolute core of the argument, the idea that for certain political groups, this conflict is incredibly useful. And check this out, because this slide lays out the parallel logic perfectly. For the Iranian regime, having an external boogeyman like Israel is basically the foundation of its entire identity. It's their reason for being, and it's the excuse they use to crush anyone who disagrees with them. On the flip side, the source argues that for Israeli hardliners, having a powerful enemy helps unite a very diverse country and keeps security at the very top of the agenda, which, you guessed it, helps them hold on to power. And you can feel this tension bubbling up inside Iran. There's this old saying that's apparently making a comeback, and it really captures the public anger over the regime's priorities. The feeling is that all of Iran's money is going to foreign groups like Hamas and Hezbollah, while ordinary Iranians are left struggling. It just shows you the growing gap between the people and the government. And this is so important to get. This aggressive foreign policy isn't coming from a place of strength. It's actually driven by fear. The regime is terrified of losing what little credibility it has left. That's why so much of this has been done in secret. If you take away the whole great Satan enemy narrative, the entire structure of the Islamic Republic could, as the source says, just become hollow from the inside out. What's fascinating is that our source points to a really similar dynamic at play for hardline parties within Israel's diverse society. You know, when there's a constant threat from the outside, all the internal disagreements can suddenly seem a lot less important, and that creates a political climate that really benefits parties who are focused on security above everything else. All right, get ready for this, because this is where the whole analysis gets really wild. It's this idea that these two so-called enemies, they might actually be helping each other out in this strange, strategic way. I mean, just listen to this quote from a former Israeli Prime Minister, Yitzhak Rabin. And get this, he said it in 1987, after the Iranian Revolution. So why would he say that? Well, at the time, both countries had a common enemy they were worried about, Saddam Hussein in Iraq. This quote is just a bombshell reminder that behind all the public shouting, the reality has always been way more complicated. So, how does this crazy cycle actually work? Let's break it down. It might start when an Israeli covert action happens inside Iran. Well, that gives the Iranian regime the perfect proof it needs to tell its people, see, the enemy is aggressive. The regime then uses that to justify its own power and clamp down on dissent. But that in turn strengthens the hardline regime, which makes it the perfect external threat for Israeli hardliners to rally their own people against. It's a perfect self-sustaining loop where each side's actions actually empower the other. And here's the absolute kicker, the ultimate irony that our source points out. Without these covert actions providing a real-life bad guy, the Iranian regime's entire story might have just collapsed from a lack of evidence.
It's a wild thought, but these actions might have been the very thing that kept the regime's justification for its own existence alive.
So, is there a way out? Could this cycle ever be broken? Well, to wrap this up, our source tells this powerful and kind of tragic story about a moment when things almost went a completely different way. See, when Yitzhak Rabin was in power, he did something incredibly brave. He dove headfirst into serious peace talks with the Palestinians. This was him basically saying, let's try a different story, one that isn't about endless conflict.
And now for the ripple effect that nobody saw coming. As the possibility of peace between Israel and Palestine started to feel real, the Iranian regime's whole reason for being, the big enemy at the gates, it started to look a little shaky. And guess what happened? A real, powerful reformist movement started to rise up inside Iran's own government. Reducing the external conflict actually created space for internal change. But then, Rabin was assassinated by an extremist. And just like that, everything changed. That momentum was shattered. The peace process stalled, and that brief window of opportunity for a different future for the entire region didn't just close, it slammed shut. And that leaves us right here with this massive question. If the very structure of power for some leaders depends on having an enemy, what does it truly take to break that cycle and make peace? It's a question that goes way beyond just Iran and Israel, and it's something worth really thinking about. Thanks for joining me on this one.